Hi everyone, and thank you again for taking the time to watch another episode of Gaffer in Gear. In today's episode, we're going to have a look at what is currently the film industry's highest colour rendering daylight LED light fixtures, the Anglerfish series by iFootage. Now, I've recorded off this light a TN30 colour render score of 98, an SSI score of 83. It has a beautiful meaty spectrum, but on top of all that, it also has fantastic DMX queuing. Alright, so these lights are available in three sizes: 60 watt, 220 watt and 320 watt. Okay, so let's start off by talking about how these guys have achieved such high colour render scores. Now, with the current range of daylight LEDs, there is usually a big trough at this point in the spectrum distribution. Now, next to this trough is a huge blue spike, and this blue spike is to compensate for the trough. Otherwise, we wouldn't get a CCT of somewhere around 5,600 Kelvin. So what these guys have done is made a broad spectrum white daylight phosphor that doesn't have that blue peak. And in addition to that, they've made a separate set of LED emitters that have a specific blue that fills in that trough. And this is the result of the two combined. Now, this isn't a new theory. Manufacturers have been working on this for about 2 to 3 years, but these guys have hit the holy grail that other manufacturers haven't been able to do, and that is creating a light engine with this capability that can last for longer than 20,000 hours. That's been the big issue, making a light engine that can do this that doesn't die early. Now, these lights haven't been around all that long, but they have been doing some thorough testing on them. Now, they do have lights that have hit and exceeded 10,000 hours already, and those lights have reduced in their life cycle by 2.1%. So based on that, they're expecting these light engines to be able to get to 60,000 hours. All right, so let's get straight into the pros and cons, and we'll do the cons first, so that way you don't have to watch the rest of the episode if one of these things is a deal breaker for you. Okay, so it's a very stylish small controller, but here is the main con for a lot of people. It only runs off AC power. You've got no DC power option. There's no battery plates and no DC inlet. The next con for me is to do with the studio mode. So what a studio mode is when the light gets power, it automatically turns on. Now, this only works 60% of the time. Let's give it a go. Okay, so it worked that time. Let's try it again. Oh, 2 in a row. This is going to make a liar out of me now. Let's try a third time. Nope. Okay, so what happens when it fails? It either trips a relay, so it turns on and turns off all the time, or the light can actually fire up, but you don't get any brightness come out of it. And the final negative for me is to do with the DMX mode. The DMX is actually superb. The smoothing and the response is second to none. But every time it receives a DMX command, the fans fire up to full speed and then drop back down. Okay, let's go through my quick list of pros. So the color render, obviously that's the big sales point with this light. Now, in terms of the color render, when you first turn it on, you think, wow, this doesn't look like an LED. It is that obvious. It hits you that hard that this thing's got better color render. The next pro for me is this thing appears to be absolutely flicker free. If I've got the light set to 0.1% and I take a photo at 1/18,000th of a second, I don't see any flicker. I can't get any flicker at all off this light, no matter what the dimmer is set to and no matter what my cameras are set to. Now, according to my frequency meter, this thing is not running pulse width modulation. Now, normally what that means is when you're dimming a light, if it's running potentiometer dimming, your kelvins tend to shift a lot, or you get a lot of color hue happening, particularly in the lower part of the dimming. That doesn't happen with this light. This has actually got some of the best dimming characteristics that I've ever come across. Throughout the dimming range, the CCT hardly moves. And in terms of the color hue change, you would not notice it unless you've got a color spectrometer. The next pro for me is the DMX. The dimming is absolutely superb. None of this flickering crap anywhere. The smoothing is beautiful, the response times are fast. This will fit in with your very expensive DMX lights. All right, so let's go through how much it costs and what you get. And This really is sensational value for money. This is 650 US dollars, about 1,000 Australian dollars. So they could easily sell it for more than that, in my opinion. All right, so it comes in a bag. So the bag's about that much wider, about an inch and a half wider or longer than most bags, but it's not as thick. It's actually quite a thin bag. Now, the packaging really is on this unit, really is second to none. Whoever designed this bag, really cared about the contents not getting damaged. So all of your major components are in separate compartments that are fully padded. So there's the light in there, and the lid is custom cut, so nothing's going to get damaged. There's the controller in there, so a lot of details gone into the box. Now, the only thing I don't like about the box is on the top it's got these Velcro straps to put your light stand in. I tend to find these get ripped off in rentals because other items are placed on top and just catch. All right, so let's start going through the contents. So you get the light, of course. The light is very well built, particularly for the price. Now, it's got a single lock-off, which is a disc brake mechanism, so that's not going to slip on you. You get a protective cap. Pretty straightforward, really, not much to talk about here. Largely sort of plastic finish, but it does feel solid. It's not gonna break on you anytime soon. Now, on the stirrup here, you do have threads, which are a standard industry thread. I don't quite know what you'd want to pop on the side there, but anyway, that's an additional mounting point. The next thing I'll pull out is the controller. So the controller is very small and very compact, but the reason it's so small, it's got no battery mounts. So it's got no DC options. It only runs off AC. Now, it does have this lanyard attached to it, which is for mounting on your light stands. Now, I find this to be a bit of a pain. It's definitely not going to come off, but it secures really, really well. And it actually is a little bit difficult to undo. So I find it to be a bit painful, but if you don't like that, well, it's got a thread on the back, so you can attach a clamp if you want. So a clamp's an optional extra. You've got your power in, so that's a Nutrix connector. You've got your power out to the light, and you've got a micro DMX port in. I'm not a huge fan of the micro DMX port because that means you need an adapter cable. And it's got the power button on the top here, which is a software-driven power button. Now, I'm not going to go through the menu system in today's episode because it's really straightforward to use, very, very intuitive. Now, the only thing to note with this is the fan modes. So it's got 3 fan modes, automatic, a low and an off. And when you select low and off, the output reduces. Now, in terms of running it in full power, the only option is auto, but I've run this on a 35 degrees Celsius day for 3 hours and the fans did not get loud at all. The next thing I'll take a look at is the dish, and again, the padding on the bag is sensational. So they've got the padding protecting the top of the dish, and inside there's even additional padding on the inside of the dish. So this isn't going to be bouncing around getting dented in transportation. So it's a faceted dish. At a distance of 3 meters, it gives you quite a nice even beam, but if you're working within 3 meters, this does have a hot spot and you do see some rings coming off the facets, but outside of a 3 meter range, quite a good dish. And the last thing is our cabling. So we've got our regional cable with a Nutrix connector. So this does feel like a PVC plastic. So if you live somewhere where it gets freezing cold, this could be a little bit problematic for you. It could get stuck in a circle. And the next thing you get is your head lead that connects the controller to the head, and that is 3 meters, 5-pin XLR. Now let's take a look at how the light performs with and without its supplied dish, as well as some third-party hard light modifiers. Okay, let's start off with no modifier. The light has a broad even beam that can easily light up a large area or a large modifier. The color of the light is consistent from one edge to the other. And the shadows are super crisp. Now let's have a look with the supplied reflector. You get about roughly 4 times the amount of light. Within about 3 meters, this definitely has a hot spot and it's a very uneven beam, but as you can see here at 3 meters, it's more than acceptable. and it definitely has multiple shadowing. Let's try it now with the Nanlite Forza Fresnel. This combination seems to work pretty good. In flood, it has a nice even spread. The unit also boxes up okay. And does reasonably good barn door cuts. It spots up quite impressively, 17,800 lux at 3 meters. And the shadow qualities are typical of that from a Fresnel. Let's try it now with the Nanlite projection attachment. And this gave me a nice even beam. It blade cuts just as good as it does with any of the Nanlite lights attached. However, I can't get a fully focused gobo projection across the beam, regardless of what type of pattern it is. These guys also make a 60 centimeter dome for this, so that sells for about 130 US dollars. All right, so it comes in a bag. Now the bag's all double stitched, so the bag's actually quite good quality. Now it's a quick release system, but the one thing I like is the buttons. They're big and they're on an angle, so they don't bite into your thumb when you're trying to undo it. All right, so all of the stitching's quite good. The material's quite good. I don't see any real problems with the manufacture. All right, let's have a look at the baffle. Now, I'm not a huge fan of baffles in this sort of setup because you've got a broad beam here, so it's going to light the entire front. And I wouldn't use these things for shooting reflective product anyway, so I'm not too worried about the front being completely even. But I do use baffles a lot to reduce the light level. I find that sometimes I've just got too much light these days. A lot of DOPs want to shoot at f1.4 or f2.8, get the background soft. So the idea behind a baffle is it diffuses the light more, hits the front diffuser, and makes it softer that way. You get more even light distribution over the front, but it just comes around here anyway on these things. So that doesn't really work if you've got a broad emitter, and the light's actually doing a big spread. If you had a spotty light on the back, then this would come into play a bit more. So does it make it any softer? Well, I'll let you judge. So this is the photo with the baffled, and this is the photo without the baffled. So the front diffuser looks like a half grid cloth. It looks like good material to me, and all of the stitching is superb. I can't see any problem at all with the stitching. And you also get a egg crate or a grid. Wow, that's a big possum I've got upstairs in my roof. All right, so that's the grid attached. Okay, that's the box. Let's take a look at what she does. All right, so the grid gives us some pretty good control. Okay, so that's 130 US dollars. They also have a lantern, so this is 99 US dollars. The build quality on this is sensational. It's more of a teardrop shape than a ball, so it's broader at the base, and it doesn't come with any skirts. That's probably the only criticism of it. Now, out of all of the lanterns I've reviewed, this one's easily got the best skeleton. So the center rods are a really thick gauge, so they don't bend around on you when you're trying to assemble it. And it comes down to this really defined point. So it catches very easy. You don't even have to look inside it as you're doing it. And a nice little touch, it's got some Velcro at the bottom here, so it attaches to the fabric nice and clean. Okay, so let's talk about the DMX. Now, the controller has a very small 3-pin micro DMX port, so you are going to need an adapter cable, which is sold separately. Now, you've got a choice of 2 adapter cables, so you can get them in a 5-pin XLR or a 3-pin XLR option. Now, let's talk very quickly about the DMX profiles. So it's got 3 DMX profiles. All the DMX profiles are 8-bit. The first profile is a single channel profile, so it just uses that one channel to dim the light. The second profile uses 3 channels, and this is a sort of white light plus an effects mode profile. So the first channel just dims the light. The second channel selects your effect, and the third channel selects the frequency of your effect. But in this 3-channel profile, it doesn't seem like you can dim the effects when they're running. The effects just run at 100% brightness. And the last profile is a 4-channel profile. So this profile enables you to run the light as a standard white light. It also enables you to run your effects. It also enables you to select the frequency of your effects and also dim your effects. All right, so let's have a look at the DMX. So I've got the Anglerfish running off an external CRMX receiver. To give you something to compare the response times to, I have an Astera tube which is also running off CRMX. Both lights will be receiving their commands at the same time. Let's start with instant on-off commands. Now let's take a look at some half-second cues. Now let's take a look at some 1-second cues. Now let's take a look at some 2.5-second cues. Now let's take a look at some 5-second cues. Now let's take a look at some random manual inputs. Let's start going through the data I've collected, starting with the AC power draw. The maximum AC power draw recorded over several days of testing was 353 watt. At 100% brightness, it is pulling 348 watt. According to my frequency meter, the light is not using pulse width modulation, so I'm assuming it's using a potentiometer dimming system. If that is the case, it is one of the best potentiometer dimming systems that I've come across. I've taken readings at 100%, 50%, 10% and 5% brightness. As you can see, there is almost no shift in the CCT. The TM30 color render does drop from 98% at 100% brightness down to 94% at 5% brightness. But let's be fair here, at 5% brightness, this has still got a better color render than a lot of expensive lights that I've tested at 100% brightness. Now the light does shift ever so slightly towards a green hue when it's dimmed. However, the difference between 100% brightness and 5% brightness is the equivalent of 1/3 of a 1/8 correction gel. So color hue shift is pretty much non-existent. Let's take a look at the spectrometer readings I got with no modifier attached. At 100% brightness with no modifier, I got 5,555 Kelvin with an SSI score of 83. The TN30 color render testing came in with a very impressive 98% color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores and all of them are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the Y point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0008, which places it ever so close to the Planckian curve, but if you're working to the daylight curve, it'll be magenta to about the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. At 5% brightness with no modifier, I got 5556 Kelvin. The SSI still comes in at a very good 81. The TN30 color render results were 94% average color accuracy with a 99% average color saturation. With the CRI results, only R10 was below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0016, which puts it above the Planckian curve by roughly the equivalent of 2/3 of a 1/8 correction gel, or if you're working to the daylight curve, it places it ever so slightly towards magenta. Let's take a look at the spectrometer results with the supplied dish. At 100% brightness with the supplied reflector, I got 5640 Kelvin with an SSI score of 83. The TN30 color render results were 97% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. All of the CRI scores were plus 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0009, which places it just above the Planckian curve. But if you're working to the daylight curve, it'll be magenta to about the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. At 5% brightness with the supplied reflector, it still comes in with an extremely good Kelvin of 5624. The SSI is still a very impressive 81. The TN30 color render results are 94% color accuracy with an average 99% color saturation. Here are the CRI results, and only R10 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0023, which compared to the Planckian curve would make the light slightly green to roughly the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel, but place the light ever so slightly magenta below the daylight curve. That's another gear review done. Thank you for watching. I'm really impressed with this light, not just because of its color render scores, but also because of how it DMXQs. The only thing that's stopping me from replacing my existing 300 watt mono lights with these is the fact that there's no V-mount option on the controller, which is a big part of my workflow. Okay, see you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear. Take care.